Okay, so I guess this is a follow-up to the previous episode, or whatever this episode is right now. It's not even. It's. We're just going. We're not. It's not anything new. It's, in other words, I'm just supposed to read what's on the screen, and that's it. Okay. In August of 1788. Okay. This is take two. Right after I published episode 11, I was just about to make it public when I realized that I had made a huge mistake in the interpretation of one of the details in the will. But before I pulled it and was going to completely redo it, I realized that my mistake really would not change the story all that much. What we're looking at here is that first appraisement, where I interpreted it as being this low number of $147. I realized that it was actually $14,700. And the difference here is that we're not looking at an extremely low appraisement. We're looking at a high appraisement, or at least that appears to be what they might have thought it was, because we don't know why. We still don't know why the second appraisement was asked for. So there's a different of the first appraisement coming out at $14,700. The second appraisement came out at $13,419. So there is a difference. Now we have a lower number, but it doesn't appear that the slaves were sold at auction. Some of them were sold, but it appears that they were sold within the family. So, for example, David Dobbs purchased a slave, so it's his father-in-law's slave, Henry, for $800 instead of the original value that was appraised, $900. And another thing that occurred was that some of the slaves were inherited by the children of Patrick, the minor children. For example, we see where William Marion McMullan received, as part of his inheritance, a slave named Wiggins, and therefore it doesn't really matter what the appraisement was for it, because this was given, like I said, as inheritance and not sold, even though Wiggins then probably went with William Marion McMullan when the son of Patrick McMullan left Georgia and went to Mississippi. So that part of the story also doesn't change, in that we don't know what the actual outcome of these 25 enslaved individuals was. We don't know what their stories are beyond their listing, their mentions in the estate papers of Patrick McMullan. And now from this, there's the rest of the story, and that is what happened to the property, and then what happened to the minor children. Okay, I'm going to pick this up from the point where I made the mistake. And so here we go. The thing that seems to have triggered the request by David Dobbs and the other man for a court-appointed appraisement of the, quote, Negro property is an earlier inventory that appraised the total value of 25 individuals at a mere $147. Okay, so just changing that will not change any of the story, because if I said $14,700, and then instead of saying this paltry sum, I would say maybe a number that was considered too high is confirmed at the final tally at the bottom of the third page of the inventory. And the court appointed 5 men now to conduct a second appraisement, and in January, the court posted an estimate of the value of the human property at $13,475. So it's a different figure. It just, instead of being a higher figure, it's a lower figure. And now, since we don't know why this appraisement was asked for, why David Dobbs and the two other men asked for it, we also don't know why the slaves were not sold at auction, which is where they would have realized this estimate of $792.64 to each person, whereas that is not what happened. And that the property was divided up, either sold at estate, as part of an estate sale, which was basically sold amongst the members of the family primarily, and that the slaves were either hired out or they were inherited by the miners. About 3 months after the court appointed David Dobbs and the others as the temporary administrators of the estate, Elizabeth McMullan, along with her stepson William, who was Patrick's eldest son, were made administrators of the estate. Now, I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that the woman referenced in the probate records as Elizabeth McMullan is the same Elizabeth Stowers McMullan, who was the second wife of John McMullan, father of Patrick, and that she is also the same woman who was later referenced as Elizabeth Prather in the probate records for Patrick's estate. So that's just my theory regarding this woman and her three identities that I believe were her three identities throughout the time that this estate was being processed. It appears that she married James Prather sometime in 1838. Now, I am also convinced that she is kin to the four orphans of Patrick McMullan and a sister of the man named Thomas Stowers, who becomes guardian of those orphans after Elizabeth marries James Prather. For one, in all three cases, she appeared to be illiterate and had to make a mark, an X, when signing her name. And it would say her mark, her name, and she put an X between her name. As to her relationship with the children, my guess is that she's either a sister to their mother or the woman's aunt, the mother's aunt. The rest of the images in the probate record for Patrick McMullan pertain to the welfare of his four minor children who were orphaned at his death. There were 2 boys and 2 girls. The eldest son, Patrick Jr., was 16 years old at the time of his father's death. Next came Mary Catherine, who was 13 years old in 1836. She was followed by William Marion, who was 11 when his father died. The youngest child, Susan Antoinette, was born in 1833. Therefore, she was only 3 years, she was born in 1833, only 3 years before her father's death. Each year following the death of Patrick McMullan, the guardian for the 4 children was apparently required by the court to file a return of how much money from the estate was spent on each of the children. Given that Susan Antoinette would not be of age until 1854, one might expect that the records would go to that year. Nevertheless, as far as I can tell, the last return was filed in 1849 by Thomas Stowers, guardian for the children. In the itemized list provided, it shows Thomas having purchased bonnet ribbons, pink gingham, and a dress shawl for young Susan A. McMullan on May the 2nd, 1848. Here is a return for 1839 showing Elizabeth McMullan, guardian for the children, having purchased for Marion McMullan a white fur hat, a silk scarf, and a pair of shoes, among other things. Next, we see in 1843, Thomas Stowers, Here we see in 1843, Thomas Stowers, guardian. Okay, let's try this again. Here we see in 1843, Thomas Stowers, guardian for Miss Catherine McMullan, purchasing for the minor girl some items, including a willow bonnet, fancy shawl, and kid slippers. I do not see a closure in the guardianship for the two girls. I believe they did eventually marry, but there is no indication of that in the probate records. Bam. Okay. We see in the record where Patrick McMullan Jr., no longer a minor, received from his guardian, Thomas Stowers, $574.93 in full. The year was 1841. The last two items on the last page in the probate records for Patrick McMullan are both signed by his son, Marion McMullan. Entry number 8 states that he received from Thomas Stowers, my guardian, one Negro man named Wiggin, in full, of all the Negro property belonging to me this 1st January 1847. Item 9 reads, received of Thomas Stowers, my guardian, $839.91.5 in full of the principal and interest of all the money from the hire of Negroes, which I claim from said guardian this 7th day of December, 1847, signed Marion McMullan. Soon thereafter, William Marion McMullan pulled up roots and moved to Newton, Mississippi, where he died in 1909. What we do not know is the fate of the slave named Wiggin. Well, I see by the old clock on the wall that we've run out of time again, and I'm sorry, but we have to end the episode here. But if you enjoyed watching this episode, don't forget to hit the like button down below, and please, please subscribe. Thank you, and goodbye.